Okay, now we enter part 4 of this series on the biblical Noah, his sons Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the dynastic race, and Japethites. Diodorus Siculus, in his Bibliotheca Historica, volume 32, states that the Celts living close to the Black Sea were scattered as far as Scythia, and the northernmost of these Celtic tribes were the wildest and most powerful, having apparently wandered across the laid waste the whole of Asia under then the name of Sumerians. And I talked about before how that hooks up with kind of like a Conan the Barbarian situation, but then again, if we go to that Conan the Barbarian situation, it's actually in a time before this, and we're looking at something pre 6000 BC at least. A little different. Diodorus describes the Celts as being tall, blond, and well built, but he may have been referring to particularly to the northern Gaelic Celts, that is, the Irish and the Scottish. The southern Celts, however, seem to have been more conservative in their tradition, since they still bear the original name of the race, Semir, and or Simri. And ironically, whenever I was showing you in that Dungeons and Dragons game that I played, that area that I've come into, and talk about the elves, and it had all of the monuments and the Stonehenge looking things and stuff, and how they were migrating, and there was these people that were migrating to New Sherindar, and who are they? And you had to talk to Simril. So this Sumeria, it's still with that same word of Sumerians. For all you have to do is put Aryans on the end of that, are the Aryans of Simri. Indeed, the priority of the southern Celts appears also in the reference of Parthenius of Nicaea's erotic Parthemata to Celtine as a daughter of Britannis, whose name is borne by the southern Celtic Britons, who fell in love with Hercules and gave birth to Celtus, who represents the Celts. So this again is saying this is birth from Hercules, and it has to do with this daughters of the Hesperides and the golden apples that were over there, and how it talks about, even in their Greek tales, how they had gone all the way as far as Western Europe. But a lot of people ignore that fact, just like they ignore that, or try to ignore the fact that whenever it talks about Ethiopians, that they're all over the place, and they're not some admixed people that are currently living in a country that we just recently called Abyssinia. For no, more than half of them are up in this area. In fact, there's a curious blob of brown that's saying Ethiopians that are right there in the Caucasus Mountains too. Celts and Scythians. Although the Celts are generally considered Western or Centrum language-speaking, Japethites, the son of Gomer in the biblical Table of Nations, indeed include Ashkenaz. The Scythians, who are an Eastern Shatim language-speaking Japethites. Riptha, or Paphlagonians, according to Josephus, and Tokarma, which are Phrygians, according to Josephus, or Armenians, according to Hippolytus of Rome. We talked about Phrygians and how that works with ancient music scales that actually go with sacred geometry and so on, and how Dorian, Locrian, Phrygian, and all the other ones are just one aspect of very many of the sacred geometry. If you haven't seen them, I beckon you to take a look at my work on sacred geometry and go farther into it even more than that. But this idea of the Scythians, and how could the Scythians have even been in the Holy Land? If you look at some ancient maps, it shows you Scythopolis right there. Yeah. So the presence of this Celtic type people is well known. I did a video last year going into it, and was going to go into something like this, and just needed a kicker like this or some other form, and another form would have been better. This just came out in January of this year of 2021. Of trying to show that whenever I showed the Celts had actually been mercenaries, and there's a lot of declamation about it through the Hittite people and the Egyptians. And so I think it was called Celts in Egypt. Question mark? And it showed Celts hanging out right there in the delta of Egypt. So people in a modern time, let me just state this in here, I guess. People in a modern time try to think back, and then these people were all separated and they never saw each other and all these things. And you'd be surprised who was where when, who knew what when, and where people had gone. In fact, I've spent the last few years showing you that, along with a lot of other things. The Celts and the Scythians are thus closely associated, and is indicated by Strabo, who states that the Greek authors called all the northern populations Scythians or Celto-Scythians. Also, Asclepius of Thrace in the 4th century BC refers to the legendary King Boreas as a king of the Celts, while in other authors he appears as a king of the Scythians, although the Scythians are younger than this Sumerians that we're talking about. So, when we talk about the Sumerians, we're talking about a term that was used broadly for all of these people of a giant area, and then later they became Scythians and being called that. And in fact, here they can find that around the time that these are being declamated, because they'd say he's king of the Celts, king of this, that, and the other, then all of a sudden they say he's king of the Scythians. Close relation between the later Celts and the Scythians is further attested in the 4th century Irish Arcept Neesis, which states that the Scythian king Phineas Farsa traveled along with the Celt Goidel mac Ethyr to Shinar, or Sumer, to study the confused languages at the Tower of Babel or Nimrod, and there he devised the northern Celtic language, Goidelic, as well as the esoteric system of writing called Ogham. This suggests that the Celto-Scythian race came into contact with the Hamitic in Babel, and benefited at least linguistically from the Semitic Hamitic culture of Mesopotamia. So this quite often is shown by a lot of people, Afrocentrics especially, and so on, and tried to use in many different ways on just how tan somebody is compared to others. In the last picture we looked at, these guys were almost as tan as this guy. These guys were extremely pale. When we find out, well, this guy was tanner than him, but this guy is out there in the middle of it. This guy's in Libya, closer and even equal to Egypt in the delta part at least. The Nilotic is actually separate and different. Guess what I'm trying to get at here is whenever they said, well, this is the table of nations and stuff, you go, yeah, well, in the Bible, when they talk about nations, they actually talked about all the way to India, all the way up to China, all of Europe that we know of today, all of the Middle East, into Egypt, all of North Africa, which the Mediterranean is called Mediterranean because it means Middle Earth. Said that enough to go silly, but hey, you know, I'm into D&D and all that stuff, and Middle Earth, you know, never mind, let's go on. But this is also disrespectful here, because there's not a person of India which shown here, which would have been darker than this person, yet still a Caucasian. If he's Southern Indian, if he's Northern Indian, he would have been like this or like that, especially at this time right here that we're talking about. But there's no Orientals that are shown here. And quite often when everybody tries to say, well, the Bible's talked about everybody, really, show me Eskimos. Show me Islanders. Show me Amerindians. Oh, they all came out that boat with this 3 blue-eyed Caucasian kids somehow. Well, no, the civilization of all those people has been afflicted with these people, have been affected greatly by them. But you could say that they heralded the civilization of quite a few places, but they didn't come out of that boat. They have their own boat theme, and so whenever they have that and they go, we kind of know that idea. Yeah, well, that was the Proto-Indo-European idea in the first place. Like I keep saying, this story goes back, way back before it's ever written down that we can find. How can we prove that? Because all these people that spurn from it all have this same similar thing that gets twisted just a little bit left and right due to where they are, the people they're with, and so on. A variation on a theme. Kind of like you can hear that Van Halen song and then you can hear somebody else trying to play that Van Halen song, and then you can hear some band trying to do the band version of a Van Halen song, and then you can get in an elevator and you hear an elevator version of a Van Halen song, and you're like, what the hell, that's Van Halen. You recognize it all, but yet it's variations on a theme. I don't know, that's one way of explaining it. Let's continue. So that was supposed to have been the four races of the world. According to ancient, is a Libyan, which is Tamahu, a Nubian, which is Nahasu, an Asiatic, which is Amu, and an Egyptian called Reth. Now, this is the four races of the world. No, for this is a blue-eyed Caucasian. This is a Caucasian, whether he's blue-eyed or not. I'm uncertain to who they're talking about. At the time we're talking about, this red-headed guy that's in Libya also are blue-eyed Caucasians. At least the ones that are running the show. This is a race. That's the same race. That's the same race. This is a different race. But this is also not related to the people of like the Khoisan of in the Cape that live there now, which used to live up more central, or West African people. While the Scythian connection may be helped to explain the incidence of brachycephaly among the Beaker folk, the importance of this affiliation is further highlighted by the fact that the Beakers themselves are traceable back to the Yamnaya culture that I've done a couple of videos about recently of the Ukraine area. Although it must be noted that the Yamnaya folk seem to have been genetically related to the Afghanistan culture as well, the Yamnaya, dating from 3500 BC to 2800 BC, was the predecessor of the hut grave and catacomb grave culture, 2800 to 2000 BC, from which the Indo-Iranian or Aryan Andronovo culture of 1800 to 1400 BC is derived. The Andronovo culture is also related to the Shinasada culture of the southeastern Urals, the mountain range there, 2300 to 1900 BC, which may also have been Proto-Aryan or Indo-Iranian. Shinashta has recently been associated with the corded ware pottery of continental northern and eastern Europe, way back at 2900 to 2300 BC, that is roughly contemporaneous with the period of the Bell Beaker pottery in the southern and central Europe and Britain. Let me say also, that's what's going on with these same people way up north in the areas they're talking about there. Meanwhile, these same people are in Sumeria, come down that river long before this number, and are in Sumeria and are in Egypt. And then there's this influx of these other people, which seems to predate the pyramids and all that come rolling in and bringing a new thing and a brand new song. Nomads and the coming Dionysus. At this point, we must note that the ancient Aryans or Indo-Iranians, which is based on Aryans, seem originally to have been nomadic peoples akin to the Scythians, as attested by the language of Old Avesta, wherein the cosmos is viewed as an enormous tent. We may remember also Megasthenes report that the Indians were in old times nomadic, like those Scythians who did not till the soil, but roamed about in their wagons as the seasons varied, from one part of Scythia to another, neither dwelling in towns nor worshipping in temples, and that the Indians likewise had neither towns nor temples of the gods, but were so barbarous that they wore skins of such wild animals as they could kill. They subsisted also on such wild animals as they could catch, eating the flesh raw before at least the coming of Dionysus into India. Dionysus, however, when he came, had conquered the people, founded cities, and gave laws to those cities, and introduced the use of wine among the Indians, as he had done among the Greeks, and taught them to sow the land, himself supplying the seeds for this purpose, like Johnny Appleseed. It is also said that Dionysus first yoked oxen to the plow and made many of the Indians husbandmen instead of nomads, made them settle down with women, and furnished them with the implements of agriculture, and that the Indians worshiped the other gods, and Dionysus himself in particular, with cymbals and drums, because he taught them so, and that he instructed the Indians to let their hair grow long in honor of the god. And a lot of people have said, you know, Dionysus is some type of Jesus thing too, and then Jesus has got long hair, just like the Nazarites, and what's the thing, and the lock of youth that Egyptians have in their hair, and a lot of young kids grow their hair out long, and then once they get jobs and things, they decide to calm it down a little bit and simmer down now. But Dionysus is actually derived from a river god, and the Nias, in the area of the people that were living around the Nias River. He is Dionysus, but also in just the name of telling right there, he's actually a Proto-Indo-European god. And like I've told you so many times, the Greek gods aren't the Greek gods of just some little place around some little mountain they call Olympus and stuff, but they were all Greek gods of the area that have been taken into a major pantheon and then looked at as being the greater forms of all of those. It's kind of why I got into them some, but it's also why I didn't, because so many people are so deep into it that you can't even pry your way in. And it's also gotten to be one of those things, even back when I was at school, that if you come up with this newfangled idea, everybody just looks at you and scoots over to another table. As he had done among the Greeks and taught them to sow the land himself. Is this telling you that even in their stories here, they're revealing to you that these people brought civilization, these animals and sowing and seeds and things, not only to India, but to the Greeks themselves prior to that point? It's what kick-started them. Broom, broom, broom. Boy, them Greeks got it going on too, didn't they? Cymbals and drums and music. Here's a picture of Indo-Scythians pushing the Greek god Dionysus with Ariadne in his chariot. This is a picture from Gandhara of the fact. I mean, you say now that prior to their fact of these Proto-Europeans coming down into that area, they had not the wheel. They didn't have domesticated cattle, and they weren't doing agriculture in the grains and the forms of what was brought to them. Strangely, when you look at this, those people that are pushing the chariot around, which almost looks like a bathtub and wheels and crazy crap, you'll notice that they have that Phrygian cap on them again, don't they? Also, those people, no matter what, if they're wearing kilts or not, you can see still in the picture at the bottom, they got pant legs and boots going on. Where does that come from? Since Dionysus is the same as the Sumerian god An and the Egyptian god Horus, the elder Osiris, we may assume that the cultural contact being referred to by Megasthenes is that between the earliest Scytho-Indian settlers of India and Elite Proto-Davidian Hurrians from the Zagros region, This suggests that the first Scythian Indians, who may have been Eastern and Southern Scythians, may have arrived in India before the rise of the Indus Valley situation circa 3000 BC, which may have been founded by these Elamite, Dravidian / Aryan Hurrian type peoples. Indeed, the first Proto-Indus settlements are observed in Manaduk, Afghanistan, neighboring Elam around 3000 BC, corresponding to the Jemdet Nazar culture of Mesopotamia. The only thing that faltered that culture right there is that the rivers quit running and people moved. The Kuli culture of southern Baluchistan also resembles early dynastic Mesopotamian 2800 BC in its pottery, the presence of fish offerings to the deity, most probably Enki, in the ruins of the shrines of most ancient temples of Eridu, which are of pre-Uruk date, is matched by the ubiquitous presence of fish symbols on the seals of the Indus Valley civilization. Oddity there is that we're nowhere near Aquarius or, of course, Pisces that we just went through, which would have delegated extra fish type knowledge things going on. Or wait, does this have something to do with things that people were going on 28,000 years before? And it developed over time? Indeed, the first Proto-Indus settlements are observed in Mandak, Afghanistan, they talk about, and how this worked over. Again, there have been archaeologists that have worked that sites and others, and they find this Proto-Aryan burials that have to do with Soma and have to do with horse burials. Let me plug this back in. And things along that nature, and that's also telling quite a bit also. It's nothing to be ashamed of in any way. It's something that happened, and it's in reality, in an effect, so why can't we just go with the truth? So this suggests that the Indus culture is indebted to the earliest Proto-Davidian Hurrian religion of Elam and the Ubaid, as the Sumerian also is. And again, we have that. So we may be going along to part 4 now here shortly. If we do, it'll come up in the top left-hand corner. We're only 22 minutes into this one, but I've gotten a low battery check. Tried to insert the battery back into it, but it's just going to ring and ring and ring like crazy, and I can't stand that. I don't know about you. Scythian Celtic influence. Given the genetically nomadic nature of the Scythians, generally nomadic nature of the Scythians, then it is not likely that in spite of the influx of the new Scythian Celtic race, the indigenous Mesopotamians, both Proto-Dravidian and Proto-Akkadian, were indebted to their urban temple-building culture to this race, even if the later may have been contributed to their social and political organization. The new race and the Beaker folk may thus have begun their history as a Celtic and Scythian branch of the Japethites family in the Ukraine, which migrated through the Middle East as well at the time of the foundation of Uruk in dynastic Egypt. While this group may have helped in the political organization of the Mesopotamian and Egyptian societies it came into contact with, it seems to have merged successfully with their original Hamitic religious cultures. In Europe, the same Scythian Celtic branch of the Japethites seems to have been responsible for the widespread bell-beaker culture that laid out the groundwork for the later Urnfield and Hallstatt cultures of the Celts themselves. Hey, and we made it to the end of it. Isn't that incredible? So now, when we talk about Celts, it's a little bit different than saying just these people over here. When we talked about the Picts that are there and how they become the Pixies and the Tuatha Danann, that are the tribe of Dan, and these all connections to these people that, like he said, are primarily northern. Of the 10 tribes, it seems like we get about 8.5 of them to have ended up in that situation. And if we look at these people not as being a 3 separated different nomenclatures or variations of people, but look at the truth and reality of it all, these same blue-eyed people that started this off are the ones that he's talking about, that started every single one of the civilizations that we're talking about. In fact, it leads to our modern people that we have today and everything that's around you. And I don't know if you know or not, but now we can fly. And we've gone up into space, and there's no telling where we'll be in the same amount of time as we're talking about in the past as in the future right now. But I have dreams that even though I won't be here, we will be Star Trek, and we'll be trying to pull off something a little more advanced than we've got now, chugging along with our slow-ass selves as we do it now. Seems like there are too many hooks in us at this point, trying to hold people down and lie and be ambiguous about the reality of these situations that are told and retold over and over again. And when you look at all of the data that goes along with it, these people were a blue-eyed Caucasian people. They contained a blonde and red-haired trait. And you can definitely see that in the Bible listed. Adama means pale and blushing. But yet, King David, Esau, and Jacob. Esau was a redhead. You can easily tell by the way it pulled out there. So there's another redhead like David, like Solomon, his father. But what color would Jacob's hair have been? Could it have been blonde, brown, darker brown? Could have been a lot of different things. Were they twins that are somehow 2 different races? No, that's impossible. That's silly. That's silly. In some ways, people that view this boat and the way that it happened are silly. The whole thing in itself is somewhat silly to believe that they saved all mankind and everything went underwater. But if we look at the time whenever everything went underwater at the last ice age around the planet, it does seem that there were a people that helped herald back civilization and herald it to people that never had it before all over the planet. And we're a product of that now. Seems like a good place to end it. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we'll get on to the next one. Peace.